hot. Is that better? Better? Okay. Well, it's good to see each one out. I'm sorry for the delay there. I was looking at a couple of thoughts I read this morning, and I was studying, and I forgot to pursue one of my thoughts. I don't know if you've ever had that problem before, but it seems like the older I get, the more I forget to follow up on my thoughts and leave loose ends to things. So, yeah, I am a grandpa, so I am losing the advantage. If you would take your Bibles, turn to 1 Peter chapter 2 is where we will pick up. And I was looking through the bulletin. Anything that needs to be added? It's always a good thing when we don't have emergencies and things like that come up, so it's always good to... Before we begin, Ron, do you mind to lead us in a word of prayer, please?
Gracious God in heaven, we're thankful for the blessings of life. We're thankful for this beautiful day that we can come together and worship you today, and we look forward to the worship hour. But we know, Father, at this time we've gathered to have a Bible class. We pray, Father, that each of us will be good students of your word. Pray for our teachers, not just in this class, but in all the classes, the lessons they were prepared will be just what we need and bring us closer to you. We have so many, Father, that are sick and continuously weak and having problems, and we pray for them, Father, that you would help them. Pray you'd be with our country. Pray especially for those that are suffering from snowstorms at this time, and those that have gone through tornadoes and various things. Pray your hand of blessing upon them. Go with us throughout the hour, Father, and forgive us of our sins, that we may come to you whole and holy, as we approach the worship hour. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I will say, just a thought before we move into the class, that it continues to, I stand in, I guess, word is awe, but reverence and thankfulness and a heart just full of thanksgiving for the way God continues and continually blesses us as a congregation. Last year we talked about it coming out of the COVID, and the way Rick put his lesson together last week was so fitting. God continues to bless us, and just every week it just continues to be a blessing that we reap here. And I'm just so very mindful of that. So it's certainly a good thing to have, just week to week to week, that we have good news and positive news, and the direction the congregation continues to go is blessed by God. So it's certainly a good thing to have. 1 Peter chapter 2, so as we've gotten through the first chapter, it seems like moving a monument, but we've made it. So I say that to say this. First chapter, really, Peter lays out the foundation that they had been given, even through their trials and difficulties and through their choice that they had made to put on Christ. They had been given gifts that were incorruptible. They were given gifts that were superior to this carnal life. They had been given the blessing of hope. They had been given a command to live in hope. And they'd been given the command to live in holiness and fear and respect. And as we close the chapter, of purity, and a purity unto unfeigned love. And so he moves on into chapter 2, and I will say it's really a continuation of chapter 1. Really, just as we know, the chapters were put in fairly arbitrarily. But if you'll look at this, when it starts off with the word, wherefore, It's a continuation. He didn't stop at chapter 1 and start chapter 2. Peter didn't. This is a continual writing of a letter. And his thought continues on into chapter 2 from what he had just given them in chapter 1. So keep that in mind. Keep that in mind that Peter's continuing on here from what we've studied. Let's look at the first 3 verses. Wherefore, laying aside all malice and all guile and hypocrisies and envies and all evil speakings, and we're very familiar with this passage, as newborn babes desire the sincere milk of the word, that ye may grow thereby. If so, ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious. There's a lot here, and so let's stop at those 3 verses, but let's look at the first little bit there. So laying aside. So Peter moves into some, you might say that this contrasts what he just left them off with love that's pure, love that is unfeigned, as it's mentioned, pure, sincere. Carries some of those sincere thoughts over into this as well. But he contrasts that love that's got that motive for, that purity, having been purified, contrasting that with things that they need to lay aside. So that does make that contrast here. Now, laying aside, I will say sometimes I don't believe we understand what he says when he says laying aside. Laying aside. A lot of times we have our car keys, and we lay them aside, put them aside, same word. And what do? Well, when you need your car, you go pick it up, and you take it with you, and you lay it aside, and you pick it up. Unfortunately, spiritually speaking, a lot of times we think of even what the command here is to lay aside very similarly. But laying aside here, Peter is telling them it's much different than just picking it up and laying it aside, picking it up, then laying it aside. That is not what he's talking about. When he talks about all of these things, let's be very clear that he's talking about a renouncing of something. When you put it aside, you never pick it up again. It's not just that you come and go and you put it aside, you pick it up, you put it off, you pick it up, you put it off, you pick it. Because a lot of times we vision so many things in our lives as just that. But when he's talking about these things of laying it aside, there's a permanent renouncing. Permanently. Never to be picked up again. Laying aside. Look at 1 John chapter 2. 1 John chapter 2, verse 15. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. These things that Peter's talking about as we move down this list are very worldly things. Now, again, that comes into contrast with what we talked for a couple of weeks about our holiness, our being set apart, our consecration, our dedication of our lives, that these are things that we don't do, but he's very specific about some things now. And I will say this, when we put these things aside, which we all do, which as we've put on Christ, we all have done this, as we do this, the world notices what we put aside, okay? And when they see that we put some things aside, that draws their ire, if you will, their contempt. Because when we lay these things aside, then they see that there is condemnation. And so when we lay these things aside, they see that we putting these good things on, which we've talked about very similarly, Galatians chapter 3, verse 26 and 27, when we put on Christ, then we're clothed in something different. So there are contrasts that, as he's saying this, that we do. Look at Acts chapter 7. Acts chapter 7 kind of makes this point as well. Acts chapter 7 and verse 58. And cast him out of the city, and I'm sorry, Nate, they're talking about Stephen here. And cast him out of the city, and they stoned him. Now, we know why they stoned him. Why did they stone Stephen? Because he was a holy man. He was full of goodness. And he was very well known in reputation from that regard. And so they, trying to stop the movement that the church had, basically put him on trial. And whenever they did that, and it uses the words in terms of the clothing, they laid his clothing down at the feet of Saul and stoned him. So Stephen had differences. He stood for what was right. He lived a holy life. He drew, because of that, their attention, the Jews. And they put him to death. And I just say that to say this, that when we put on Christ, when we put our former lives, of whatever that sin is, and everybody's sin's different, when we put that to the side, there is a contrast. The world sees that. They see that we stand for something and implicitly in opposition to something else. And so from that standpoint, when we lay it aside and our lives have been changed, we don't go back to that. It's permanent. And it is a renouncing. And it's a very decisive act. And I will say that. You know, when we put on Christ in baptism and we change our lives, it's a very decisive act that the world around us sees. And we've talked about it a little bit last week. When you come across brethren you don't know that are brethren, you can tell. There's differences about the way we live our lives. We should see that. But I just say that to say this. So these things that he's talking about here, through our obedience, as we lay these things aside, there are things that we just don't go back to permanently. We can't from that standpoint. Lay aside all malice. So malice, anytime you see that three-lettered word, three-lettered M-A-L, I'm not a Greek scholar by any means, but I did average in introductory Latin, and I use a lot of Latin quite a bit through the daytime. So anytime you see mal, M-A-L, is always a bad connotation to whatever that is. When you have a malignancy, mal is bad. Anytime you see mal, malodorous. I'm claimed all the time by my wife. I've got malodorous. Well, that's a bad smell. Anytime you see mal is bad. So malice, you know right there that is something bad. So lay something from that standpoint, malice. And malice is basically moral inferiority. So thinking on a level that's below yourself. It's really not thinking of things that you should. It's an ill will. Malice is also, malignity is another word that sometimes is used. Instead of dignity, malignity. There's always those two things that you can put in opposition. But a desire that really you don't desire the best for someone else. You have ill will for them. And so malice desires that. So it's a heart that's really full of bad stuff from that standpoint. we're told to lay that aside. All guile. We don't use the word guile very much, but guile is basically, you might have heard of the old bait and switch. Now this is guile. It's basically an entrapping. It's bait. Basically fraud. You might think of harlotry, because harlotry is guile. She looks so good on the surface, and then you buy into that sin, and it's full of nothing but terrible, bad stuff. It's a trap. Harlotry is very deceitful. It's trickery. So when you see from the standpoint laying aside all guile, laying aside all those things that are not truthful, baiting, trapping, fraud. I mean, there's things that we really probably don't have a problem laying aside, truthfully. But evidently, there was some that Peter was writing this to that did. So we're given the same instruction to lay this aside. Hypocrisy. What is hypocrisy? Okay, very much so. Yes. So in the Greek, that's literally what it is. The play actor on a stage. So people that are acting is very much as we would consider saying one thing, but is that really their life on stage? No. They're acting. They're actors. That's what they do for a living. Now, we somewhat understand this from our standpoint as Christians, that we can't do that. We can't live a life of play acting. How would we perhaps play act? How might we say one thing and do another? How does that come out in our lives today? Huh? Two-faced? Yeah. Yep. How else is that? How do we maybe see that? How do we see that in action today? Lots of different. Yep, yep. So Sunday, we're here at church Monday, and we condemn sin on Sunday, but Monday, what do? Right back in it. That's very true. How else? There's lots of different ways. What if we do the same thing in terms of condemning sin, but then we don't repent of our sin? Maybe we repent of what I call the easy stuff, right? Yeah, we're not going to do that. We're going to turn from all that, but let's say we even hold on to 1%. 1%. If we hold on to 1%, have we really, truly repented? No. And that's where sometimes we get caught. Yeah, we will get rid of the bad stuff, but, there's one thing that I can't get rid of. We say we do, but we don't. And that's where a lot of this comes in, from the standpoint of living one life, portraying another. There's lots of ways we can say one thing and do another. And there's lots of different ways that we can play. You might even say, as a play actor, a Christian life. But if we're living another life, God knows. Our Heavenly Father knows. And the sad thing is in the end, we still stand condemned if that's what we're doing. And that's what Peter wants us to be very clear about. Be very clear about not living, and to lay it aside, as he says, permanently, hypocrisies and envy. Envy, what's another word for envy? Jealousy. Jealousy. And we understand, I think, jealousy. You might put in some other words as well. spite, discontent, ill will, very similar to guile, ill will. And we might think from the standpoint, I'm content and I'm fine with this. I don't have any problems with that. Let's look at James chapter 3 real quick. James chapter 3 and verse 17. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy. You know, from that standpoint, as we have wisdom and as we grow, and as we put these things on in our lives as Christians, who does that kind of describe? Kind of describes a fairly mature Christian. Someone that's worked at becoming who they should be in the Word. This isn't something that comes on just quickly, but it's wisdom that, as we put these things on, becomes part of our life. It's our faith in our life becoming active and really has a maturity to it. Well, I say that to say this, you know, that takes time, and as we put these things aside, all of these things, sometimes they take some time for us to do. So as he says here, as we lay these things aside, and let me add one more word here too. Get back to where I'm supposed to be here. The last one being an evil speaking. So as we lay these things aside, malice, guile, hypocrisies, envies, evil speaking. What would evil speaking be? Slander. Yep, slander. Slander and putting someone down in terms of their character. It's a lie. The word in the Greek is blasphemia. We understand that word, blaspheme, to lie against. So to lie against someone, to speak evil to them, of them, is not Christian at all. I'll just say, for the sake of time, James chapter 4:11 and Galatians 6:10. So we should treat our brethren better than that. Now, and I've said this before, not here, but I say, you know, in this life, sometimes, brethren, we don't have a lot per se, you know, but things that we do have is our character and our integrity. And when someone assaults and insults and takes that on through slander, that's very meaningful. We don't have a lot, but you know, when we have our character and our integrity and someone slanders and runs us down and speaks evil, that should go to the quick. We shouldn't do that to one another. And when we see that happen, we're told that that's to be put away. In our lives, we're to put all that away. Those contrast, all those things that he talked about, as I mentioned at the end of the first chapter, having been purified and having put on Christ, and that should naturally drive us to love one another. These things should be completely put away, put to the wayside.
Have you noticed all of these are attitudes?
Yeah.
And if we truly love like we should, those things won't even come into play.
It's a no point. If we love like we're supposed to, it's a no point. It'll never be there. So these are attitudes, and these are attitudes that we are not to have. And very much, like I said, in contrast to that purity that we're commanded to have at the end of the first chapter. Any points up to those, through that first verse? Like I said, there's a lot there, and we'll go on down through. Any? Yep.
Just some of the things that we have in our life, though, like this, we may have trouble putting away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's when we don't try it, I think that's where the problem comes in.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it does. For some of it, you know, and then we all, like I said, and that's why I say everybody's is a little different. I've never had a problem with smoking. That's just me. I've never had a problem with it. I saw what it did to my family. I saw, no, I don't think I better do that. I had an uncle named Smokey, smoked 3 packs a day, and it killed him. I mean, in the end, it did. I saw the effects that it had on his life, and so, and same thing with alcohol. I saw the effects of alcohol in my family. I never had a problem with it. I said, I should probably ought not drink. I see the effects of that. I just maybe, as a young person, was a little bit more foresight, but I saw it, and I said, I don't want to do that. Now, others have had problems with it, no doubt about it. It's hard to quit once you start. But my sin is not everyone else's sin either. The sin that I contend with is probably sins that people don't worry about. We're all different. But it is all the same from the standpoint we all have to get rid of these things. We all have to get rid of these attitudes in our life, as Peter instructs us, and move on in maturity from that standpoint. Yeah.
I don't think it matters what, I don't know what it's called, stage of a Christian you are. I think you fight that until you die.
Yeah.
You fight the temptation.
Yeah.
Satan is right there to
Oh, yeah.
jump on you.
Yeah, he does. As we get into the chapter 5, as he's a roaring lion, and I've always said it, he wants those that he doesn't have. Well, who does he not have? Every single one of us. He wants us. And so he knows exactly what the weakness is. He knows. And so the thing that this brings out here is as we continually fight these, we lay these things aside, we get them out of our life, and if we do these things, that lays a foundation for having the right attitudes on a lot of other things. And as we grow and mature, you're right, he's always going to be trying. Till the day we die, he wants us. And so we have to be mindful of that. He's a roaring lion. He's a predator. He wants us, and he's trying. So.
Sadly, the next verse talks about these newborn babes.
Yep.
We have a lot of people sitting on the pew for 40 years who are still newborn babes. They still practice and still have their eternal life. They have not visible yet.
We're going to get right into the middle of that.
Just as babyish as the ones who just came out of the baptistry.
Yep.
They may be sitting there for 20 years.
Yep. Yep. Well, let's move into that. So, comma, verse 1, comma, continuing on. As newborn babes, desire the sincere milk of the word that you may grow thereby. Now, all the bad stuff we just talked about, again, it stands into contrast with what Peter had just ended the chapter on in purity, and what's he come back to again? A sincere milk of the word. Now, we talked about sincerity. What is that again? Sincerity. It's truth. It's purity. It's, someone said the word last time, and I agreed with it. I didn't write it down, but it's actually very, very true. Authentic. It's pure. It's unadulterated. It's not been changed. It's with, and you might think it's without all these things that we just talked about. The sincerity of the purity of the word contrasts all these things that he just said put away. Never go back to them. Now let me ask you this. So we have a couple of dairy farmers that have been here. Would it be okay to take the milk and spill it on the floor and just sweep it back up and put it in there and send it on? Would you drink that dirty milk? I mean, but when we're talking about the sincere milk of the word, sometimes that's what we do. I mean, we see it get changed. Sometimes we change it ourselves. Sometimes we alter it. Instead of drinking the sincere, pure, unadulterated word and putting it in our life when we like it and when we don't, and letting it have that effect, so many people leverage and change it. It becomes adulterated and changed, and dirt's in it. That's a fine. We drink it anyway. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about a pure, sincere milk of the word. But let's go back to as newborn babes. So when babies eat, we know, most of us have had children and such. There's two things I'd like to distinguish because I've heard this misstated before. How long do babies remain babies? Generally. 6, 12 months, right? Something like that. And then they become what? A little toddler. And then they become what? And then they become children. And then they become, So there's a, but I'm just saying, how long do babes remain babes? Ballpark, a year, right? How long do babies drink milk? About a year. Well, let me ask, as the sole part of your diet, that's what we're talking about. So about a year, and then what do babies do? They get teeth. Ask any nursing mother. She doesn't really care for that. So they move on. But the thing is what you were mentioning. It's going to that point of how long. We should desire that sincere milk of the Word as babes, but as we digest it, and as we nourish it, and as we drink it, we become what? As it says here, we grow. We grow. And that ye may grow thereby. Now, there's a difference between remaining a babe, which is what Clayton mentioned, remaining a babe and remaining with the demeanor of a child as we're instructed to. And that's where people miss the point. Many people go to this verse and they remain as babes, they say, because we're told to. 40 years later, as a Christian, never maturing. Well, that's actually not what he's saying here. In fact, you could say that would be missing the point. How many 40-year-olds continue to nurse? None. 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 But how many 40-year-old Christians do we have drinking milk? We should mature. We should grow. I'll put it into another way that's a lot easier to understand. Graduate high school. We've got a 12-year GED degree that complements us for graduating high school. How many of us go on to college? Many of us have gone on to college, gotten a 4-year degree. You get your bachelor's degree. Go on and do graduate education and you get your master's degree. Well, that would take, in our day and age, 24, 25 years maybe, right? Took me more than 30, but that's fine. I'm slow to learn. But that being the case, when you end up with that, you've got a mastery of whatever that is that you've studied. And you've demonstrated that. But how many Christians do we have that have studied the Word for 30 to 40 years and still at that point? That's not the way it should be. We should at that point in time have grown. There's it's an old term, but it's very, very fitting. You might have seen some of this term, but the term is, as a baby, if I see a baby comes in at 18 months and they're 20 pounds and they're not growing, there's a condition we call that failing to thrive physically. And that's a very, very fitting thing to think about. If we're Christians and we're 40 years into our Christian walk and we haven't grown, we fail to thrive. And we see failure in thriving throughout the lifespan. Sometimes as we are at the end of our life, we fail to thrive and we're dying. So that being the case, think of, are we thriving as we should when we're drinking the sincere milk of the Word. Because if we're thriving and we're growing, 12 months into a Christian walk, yeah, we'll be a year into our Christian walk, but we won't be the same as we were 12 months ago. 5 years into our Christian walk, we should not be as we started 5 years prior. We should be growing, just like a child. When you feed a child, what's it do? It's pretty simple. You just got to stay out of the way. They grow. They grow. You feed a child, they grow. And if you, on the Word of God, a young Christian drinks the sincere milk of the Word, there's only one outcome. They grow. And we should grow.
Dan?
Yes.
It just kind of goes back to, the 30 years of education. You had to take refresher courses or
I still do.
whatever.
Yeah.
So we don't ever stop.
No.
Even
True.
people that are non-professional people,
Yep.
we should never stop.
Yep. 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 We don't stop. And I say that to say this because even as adults, I eat 3 square meals a day still, but I don't drink milk. Now we have progressed as a child does. A child's diet changes. A baby's diet changes. A baby's diet moves on from milk to what? Cereal, applesauce. Yeah. And then finally they change and they get teeth more where they can chew up more, and it changes. I'm just saying the diet changes. It's not milk forever. It's milk at first. They progress on pretty quickly to some substance. And then the substance is, as it's described in the letter later, in terms of meat, eating meat, And so from that standpoint, that's where we should be at. And so, yep.
That's like Clayton said. You start out drinking milk and you go to solid food, but it doesn't hurt.
Oh,
Go
yeah.
back to the middle
No.
to refresh.
Yeah, I love ice cream, It's got milk in it, And so I just say that, absolutely. Milk is maybe a little bit of that diet, but to sustain us as adults, nutritionally, we need a lot of things to sustain us. And so dietary-wise, it is a good similarity, and from that standpoint. No. Nutriently, we need much more than that. So I say that to say this. So it kind of goes to the point that we've kind of made before from the standpoint is newborn babes desire that sincere, and let me back up to that sincere desire. Do you have to remind a baby to eat? Never. No. They tell you when they're hungry, and they're really good at it. And they're hungry, they eat, but guess what? Then they don't complain. They're fine till the next time they need to eat. And I say that sometimes we complain a little bit with what we eat. I do, and I find myself being that way, and I shouldn't. But same thing with arguing with what we're eating spiritually. We shouldn't argue about that, and we shouldn't complain about it. We should be very thankful for what we have from that standpoint. That the end result in verse 2 is that ye may grow thereby. It is a positive direction once we're, as babes, desiring that sincere milk of the Word, that we will grow thereby. And to kind of close the point out, if so, ye have tasted that the Lord is gracious. It's interesting that he uses that term, tasted. It's a very good taste, evidently, and it is something that is the sincere milk of that Word brings this growth. And as he's telling these that he's writing to, if ye have so tasted that the Lord is gracious. Now, a lot of times we isolate verse 2 and we just talk about that sincere milk of the words as babes, and we don't think about that taste that it has. It's a very good taste. It's a very desired taste, that the Lord is gracious. How is that he is gracious? As we're eating that sincere milk of the Word, or as we're taking that in. Kindness? That he is kind?
Kindness of the Lord.
Okay.
Kind of interesting thought.
That is a good thought.
This word that says in the Lord, if indeed you have tasted, if you indeed have tasted that the Lord is good.
Goodness, kindness, graciousness. And I will say, as we have tasted that, I would say another word might be that as we have enjoyed that milk, as we have taken it in and enjoyed it, that we see that the fruit that it bears in our life is virtuous, that it's goodness, it's kindness, that the Lord is kind and gracious. Now, being mindful too that this kind of reminds me a little bit of the parable of the sower. You know, we need to have our hearts open to the word as it is. And as we take this word in, letting it cultivate in our lives to produce, as a parable of the sower in the soils, fruitful ground, a fruitful product. The Lord is gracious. He's given us every opportunity to have everything that he's promised, and what he had said in the first chapter of a life of hope, eternal hope, an eternal home with him, despite what we've done, that we have this hope that we can have that, and so when we don't deserve it. So that's very much a gracious, kind, good God that has offered that to us, that we see as we enjoy this in our lives, that's the product that we will get.
Verse 3 has a little bit of a different connotation.
What's it say?
It says, here it says, grow in them, because as you water the cow, you're growing.
Right.
But it says, that in verse 3, you remember, it makes it conditional.
Well, true.
If you have tasted the kindness.
True. It does say if in the King James too. If so be. That is conditional.
You're going to grow if you allow God to be your source.
True. True. That's a good point. That's a very, very good point. It is. I mean, because again, if you don't, so we do see, like I mentioned, some babies that don't eat, they fail to thrive. And that's really kind of a life-threatening condition that some children, that maybe they've got a malady of some sort that they can't absorb. They don't eat, and then they're threatened in terms of their ability to live. But I say this in physical context. Spiritually, that would apply here. If you don't eat of the sincere milk of the word, then you won't grow thereby. There is a contrast there to be made. So from the standpoint of, that's a very good point, it is conditional. And I don't think that anybody would taste or enjoy the milk. That is a contrast in and of itself too. I mean, the only outcome really is that when you've tasted it, if you've tasted it, that you've enjoyed it. The graciousness of our Lord, the kindness of our Lord and our Heavenly Father. So very good, very, very true. Look at 1 John. We'll close with this. 1 John chapter 5. Kind of brings the same thought. 1 John chapter 5, verse 3. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not grievous. And they're not. We know that as we employ them in our lives, that as it mentioned, as we lay these things aside, as we live our lives, there is a contrast to be made to the world, and the world realizes that. Sometimes they do not like it. Sometimes it raises their muster, if you will, and ire, and they know that we stand for things in our lives as we do. As I mentioned, sometimes as we take the Lord's Supper every first day of the week, as we do that, we proclaim his death. Well, in proclamation of his death, we also stand in contrast to what the world is doing as well. So proclamation and living our lives in such a way, people see that. And as we do continue to grow, as we're instructed to do, we taste and enjoy the kindness and graciousness of our Heavenly Father. Any closing comments or anything up to that point? Okay, very good. I appreciate the comments, and we'll pick up in verse 4 next week and probably make it halfway through the chapter, I'm going to guess. So appreciate the comments.